The morning sun reflected off the glass towers of downtown as Margaret Hayes stepped out of her black car. She was the CEO of Quantum Dynamics Corporation, and today was going to be another frustrating day. Her team had been working on a problem for 6 months with no success. The problem was about sending messages faster across space to human colonies on distant planets. Right now it took too long, and sometimes the messages never arrived at all. Margaret walked through the lobby where employees greeted her with nervous smiles. Everyone knew about the failing project. The company had invested millions and the board of directors was losing patience. She took the elevator to the 42nd floor where her top scientists were already waiting in the conference room. Dr. Kenneth Price stood by the holographic display looking tired. He was her best physicist, and if he could not solve this, then nobody could. The equations floated in the air like glowing blue ghosts. Margaret had looked at them so many times she saw them in her dreams. Kenneth began his presentation, but Margaret already knew what he would say. The signal degradation problem was still there. Every time they tried to send a message beyond the asteroid belt, the quantum particles lost their connection. It was like trying to have a phone conversation where every third word disappeared. The outer colonies needed better communication or people would die when emergencies happened. After an hour of discussion, Margaret dismissed the team. She told them to go home and rest and come back with fresh minds on Monday. The scientists filed out looking defeated. Kenneth was the last to leave, and he gave Margaret a sympathetic look before closing the door. Margaret stood alone in the conference room staring at the equations. She walked to the large whiteboard on the wall where they had been brainstorming ideas. Someone had erased most of it, but there were still some marker streaks visible. She was about to leave when something caught her eye. In the bottom right corner of the whiteboard was a series of mathematical notations written in pink marker. The handwriting was childish with uneven letters and numbers. At first, Margaret thought it was just random doodles, but then she looked closer. The equations were structured in a way she had never seen before. They used a recursive harmonic function that somehow incorporated quantum entanglement decay rates. Margaret felt her heart beat faster. She pulled out her phone and called Kenneth. He answered on the third ring, sounding confused about why she was calling him 5 minutes after he left. "Kenneth, come back to the conference room, right now," Margaret said. When Kenneth returned, he found Margaret standing by the whiteboard with her arms crossed. She pointed at the pink equations without saying a word. Kenneth approached, slowly adjusting his glasses. He stared at the childish handwriting for 10 seconds, then 20, then 30. "Where did this come from?" Kenneth whispered. "I have no idea," Margaret replied, "but is it what I think it is?" Kenneth pulled out his tablet and started photographing the equations. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen as he input the formulas into his simulation software. Margaret watched his face go from curious to shocked to amazed. The tablet screen showed results that should not be possible. "This solves our problem," Kenneth said in disbelief. "Whoever wrote this found a way to use the quantum foam in space as a transmission medium. Instead of fighting against signal degradation, this formula uses the natural vibration of space-time itself. Margaret, this is genius-level work." "But look at the handwriting," Margaret said. "This was written by a child." Kenneth looked at the pink marker and the uneven numbers again. He had assumed someone was just being playful with their notation, but Margaret was right. This was definitely a child's handwriting. No adult scientist would write their 7s with a little flag on top or draw smiley faces in the zeros. "We need to find out who wrote this," Margaret said firmly. She walked to the phone on the conference table and called security. The head of security answered immediately. "I need to see footage of this conference room from last night," Margaret ordered. "Someone was in here after hours and I need to know who." The security chief said he would pull the footage and send it to her office within 10 minutes. Margaret and Kenneth went down 2 floors to her private office. The space was decorated with awards and photos from successful product launches. On her desk were family pictures showing her husband and 2 teenage sons. The security footage arrived as an encrypted video file. Margaret opened it on her large monitor and Kenneth pulled up a chair beside her. They fast-forwarded through hours of empty conference room until finally, at 11:30 at night, the door opened. A man in a janitor uniform entered, pushing a cleaning cart. He looked to be in his 40s with dark hair and a tired face. He began his routine of emptying trash cans and wiping down the tables. But he was not alone. Behind him, a little girl walked into the room. She looked about 8 years old with her hair in 2 ponytails. She wore jeans and a purple sweater and carried a small backpack. The janitor worked quietly while the girl sat at the conference table doing what appeared to be homework. She had books and papers spread out in front of her. After about 20 minutes, the girl stood up and wandered over to the whiteboard. She picked up a pink marker from the tray and stared at the equations that were still visible on the board. Margaret and Kenneth leaned closer to the monitor. The girl stood on her tiptoes and began writing. Her movements were casual, like she was doodling pictures of flowers or hearts. But instead she was writing complex mathematical formulas. She filled the corner of the board with equations, then stepped back to look at her work. She seemed satisfied because she smiled and put the marker back. The janitor called to her and she ran back to pack up her homework. They left the room together at 11:55. The timestamp on the video proved that this little girl had written the solution to a problem that had stumped some of the smartest scientists in the world. Margaret sat back in her chair, feeling dizzy. Kenneth was shaking his head in disbelief. They watched the video 3 more times, looking for any explanation. Maybe the girl had copied something she saw earlier. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but Kenneth ran the formulas again and they were too perfect to be accidental. "Who is that janitor?" Margaret asked. The security chief replied through the computer speaker. "His name is Daniel Cooper. He has worked night shift here for 3 years. Clean background check. Never missed a day of work. Very quiet guy. I need to meet with him immediately," Margaret said. "And his daughter. Whatever he is teaching that child, humanity needs to know about it." Margaret Hayes paced in her office, waiting for Daniel Cooper to arrive. She had not slept well after watching the security footage. Her mind kept returning to the image of that little girl, casually writing equations that solved a 6-month problem in minutes. It defied everything Margaret understood about child development and learning. 8-year-olds were supposed to struggle with multiplication tables, not quantum mechanics. Kenneth had run the formulas through every simulation they had. The results were consistent and revolutionary. If they could implement this approach, their communication arrays would work perfectly across any distance. The colonies on the outer rim would have instant contact with Earth. Supply ships could coordinate better. Emergency responses would save lives. This was the breakthrough quantum dynamics needed, but where had it come from? Margaret had researched Daniel Cooper through every database available to her. His employment record at Quantum Dynamics was spotless. Before that, he had worked at 3 other cleaning companies. Before that, there was nothing. His social security number only went back 15 years. His birth certificate and school records appeared legitimate, but something felt wrong about them. Margaret had connections in various government departments from her years in the defense industry. She made a few discreet calls asking about Daniel Cooper and Lieutenant Daniel Cooper. The response she got was immediate and frightening. A man identifying himself as Agent William Clark from the Department of Defense called her within an hour. "Ms. Hayes, I understand you have been making inquiries about certain individuals. I need to remind you that some matters are classified for national security reasons. I strongly suggest you drop this line of investigation." Margaret had dealt with government bureaucrats before, and she knew that response meant she was onto something important. She thanked the agent politely and ended the call. Then she made her decision. She would meet with Daniel Cooper and hear his story directly. Whatever the government was hiding, she had a right to know, especially if it affected her company and her research. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, Daniel Cooper arrived at the executive office. Margaret's assistant showed him in and offered coffee, which he declined. Daniel sat in the chair across from Margaret's desk, looking uncomfortable in his janitor uniform. He had the weathered face of a man who had worked hard his entire life. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Cooper," Margaret began. "I want to assure you that you are not in any trouble. I asked you here because I need to understand something." She turned her computer monitor so Daniel could see the security footage frozen on the image of Lisa writing on the whiteboard. Daniel stared at the screen and his shoulders slumped slightly. He had known this moment would come eventually. "That is my daughter, Lisa," Daniel said quietly. "I bring her to work sometimes when my wife has late shifts. I know it is against policy, and I understand if you need to fire me." Margaret shook her head. "I do not care about policy violations, Mr. Cooper. I care about what your daughter wrote on that whiteboard. My head physicist confirmed that her equations solve a problem we have been struggling with for 6 months. An 8-year-old child should not be able to do that. So I need you to explain how she learned this. Daniel was silent for a long moment. Margaret could see him wrestling with some internal decision. Finally, he looked up and met her eyes. I taught her, Daniel said. Margaret leaned forward. You taught her quantum mechanics and harmonic recursion functions. Mr. Cooper, where did you learn theoretical physics? Daniel took a deep breath and Margaret could see his hands shaking slightly. What he said next would sound impossible, but the evidence was already proven on her whiteboard. 15 years ago, I was Lieutenant Daniel Cooper, Communications Specialist on the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge. We were doing a survey mission near a star system about 30 light-years from Earth. We detected unusual energy readings on the fourth planet and went to investigate. What we found there changed everything I thought I knew about the universe. Margaret listened without interrupting as Daniel described an ancient alien installation built by a species that called themselves the Architects. The facility was enormous, covering hundreds of square miles. It was designed as a teaching center with interactive displays and preserved databases. The Architects had been gone for thousands of years, but their knowledge remained intact, waiting for someone to find it. My crew spent 3 months at that facility, Daniel continued. We learned mathematics and physics that made our own science look primitive. The Architects understood that the universe operates on principles we had never considered. They left their knowledge behind, hoping that younger species would find it and advance. Why have I never heard of this discovery? Margaret asked. Something that important would be the biggest news in human history, because the government classified everything, Daniel said bitterly. When we returned to Earth, military intelligence seized all our data. They said humanity was not ready for this knowledge. They said it would destabilize society and cause panic. They split up the crew and gave us new identities. We were ordered never to speak about what we found. They offered me 2 choices. I could disappear into a classified research facility and work for the government for the rest of my life. Or I could accept a civilian identity and never practice advanced science again. You chose freedom, Margaret said, understanding. I chose my family, Daniel replied. I wanted to get married and have children and live a normal life. The government gave me the identity of Daniel Cooper, Janitor. They sealed my military records and made Lieutenant Daniel Cooper disappear from all official documentation. For 15 years I have kept that promise. I clean offices at night and go home to my family. Nobody knows who I really am. But you taught your daughter, Margaret said. You broke your agreement. Daniel's expression hardened. The Architects believed that knowledge should be shared. They thought hoarding information was wrong. Every night while I clean these offices, I teach Lisa what I learned. She does not understand the full implications yet. To her, it is just interesting puzzles and bedtime stories. But she is learning what humanity could be if we stopped hiding from ourselves. Margaret sat back in her chair, processing everything she had heard. Part of her wanted to dismiss this as an elaborate fantasy. But the equations on her whiteboard were real. The simulation results were real. And Daniel's story explained what should be impossible. The government will never allow this knowledge to go public, Margaret said. I know, Daniel replied. That is why I have been careful for 15 years. But when Lisa saw your equations on the board, she wanted to help. She did not understand she was solving something impossible. She just saw a problem and knew the answer. Margaret made a decision that would define her career. I want you to bring Lisa here tomorrow evening after normal business hours. I want her to meet with my top scientists in a private demonstration. If what you are saying is true, then we need to document this properly. Daniel looked uncertain. They will come for us. The government monitors people like me. Once word gets out that Lisa can do this, they will take her away. Margaret leaned forward and her voice was firm. Mr. Cooper, I have spent my entire career building this company. I have connections in Congress and the media and the scientific community. If the government tries to suppress this again, I will make sure the whole world knows about it. Your daughter may have just saved lives on the outer colonies. Humanity deserves to know the truth. Daniel studied Margaret's face, looking for any sign of deception. Finally, he nodded. I will bring Lisa tomorrow at 8 in the evening. But Ms. Hayes, you need to understand what you are starting. The people who classified the Architect's discovery do not like being challenged. This will not be simple. Nothing worth doing is ever simple, Margaret replied. She stood and offered her hand. Daniel shook it, and for the first time in 15 years, he felt the weight of secrecy beginning to lift from his shoulders. The world changed rapidly in the weeks following Lisa's revelation. Scientists who had been skeptical at first began replicating her formulas with stunning success. A research team in Tokyo built the first prototype communication array using Lisa's quantum harmonic approach. They established a connection with the Mars colony that had zero signal degradation and instantaneous response time. The colonists on Mars wept with joy when they could finally have real-time video conversations with their families on Earth. Media coverage was relentless. Every news channel ran stories about the girl genius and her janitor father. Some outlets praised Margaret Hayes as a hero who exposed government corruption. Others criticized her for releasing potentially dangerous information without proper oversight. But the public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. People were hungry for the truth and tired of government secrecy. Daniel Cooper became an unlikely celebrity. Talk shows wanted him as a guest. Publishers offered book deals. Universities offered him teaching positions with full professor salaries. But Daniel turned down most requests. He agreed to one major interview with a respected science journalist who promised to focus on the architects and their message, rather than sensationalizing his family. The interview aired on a Sunday evening and drew record viewership. Daniel sat in a comfortable chair looking tired but determined. The journalist was a middle-aged woman named Laura Chen, who had a reputation for asking tough questions without being hostile. Mr. Cooper, Laura began. 15 years ago, you were part of a crew that made the most important discovery in human history. Why did you agree to keep it secret for so long? Daniel thought carefully before answering. When we first returned from the architect's facility, we were excited to share what we found. We thought humanity would celebrate this discovery. But the military saw it differently. They saw weapons and strategic advantages. They saw chaos if this information went public, and honestly, part of me understood their concerns. The architect's knowledge is vast, and some of it could be dangerous in the wrong hands. But you changed your mind, Laura prompted. I changed my mind when I had a daughter, Daniel said quietly. I watched Lisa grow up curious and brilliant. I taught her mathematics and physics because she loved learning. When she started grasping concepts that took me months to understand, I realized the architects were right. They believed knowledge should be shared because intelligence can appear anywhere. My daughter proved that. She is just a regular kid from a regular family, but she has the capacity to understand the universe in ways that most trained scientists struggle with. What do you want people to know about the architects, Laura asked. Daniel leaned forward and his voice became passionate. The architects were not like us. They did not think in terms of nations or territories. They saw the universe as interconnected. They built that teaching facility because they believed younger species would eventually find it. They wanted to help us avoid the mistakes they made. They learned too late that hoarding knowledge and building walls only leads to stagnation. They wanted us to do better. The interview continued for an hour. Daniel described the architect's facility in detail. He explained how their teaching methods were designed to make complex concepts intuitive. He talked about the mathematics of quantum foam and harmonic resonance. He showed examples of Lisa's work and explained how she had learned to see patterns that others missed. Near the end, Laura asked the question everyone wanted answered. Are there other people like you, Mr. Cooper? Other members of the Horizon's Edge crew who have this knowledge? Daniel nodded. Yes, there were 12 of us on that mission. The government split us up and gave us all new identities. I do not know where most of them are now. But if they are watching this interview, I want them to know it is safe to come forward. The truth is out. We do not have to hide anymore. Within days, 3 other crew members revealed themselves. A woman named Lisa Martinez, who had been living in Seattle as a librarian. A man named Gregory Santos, who had been working as a high school teacher in Florida. Another woman named Claire Yang, who had been a mechanic in California. Each one had their own story of struggling with the burden of secrecy. Each one had tried in small ways to share what they knew without breaking their security oaths. The government's response was a mixture of damage control and grudging cooperation. Congressional hearings were scheduled to investigate why the architect's discovery had been classified. Several high-ranking officials were forced to resign. The president gave a televised address acknowledging that mistakes had been made and promising more transparency going forward. But the real change happened in the scientific community. Research institutions around the world began collaborating in ways they never had before. The architects had demonstrated that knowledge grew faster when shared freely. Scientists took that lesson to heart. Open-source databases were created to share research findings. International teams formed to tackle problems too large for any one country to solve alone. Lisa's communication breakthrough was just the beginning. Other applications of architects' knowledge began emerging. A team in Germany developed a new approach to fusion energy, based on harmonic resonance principles. Researchers in India found ways to purify water using quantum filtration that Lisa's father had taught her. Medical scientists discovered treatments for diseases by applying architects' understanding of how cells communicate at the molecular level. Not everything was positive. There were concerns about rushing into technologies that were not fully understood. Some religious groups protested that studying alien knowledge was dangerous. A few governments tried to weaponize aspects of the architect's science. But overall, the mood was optimistic. Humanity felt like it was finally growing up and joining a larger cosmic community. Margaret Hayes testified before Congress defending her decision to release the information. She faced hostile questions from representatives who accused her of endangering national security. But she stood firm in her conviction that the benefits outweighed the risks. "Congressman, I understand your concerns," Margaret said, during one particularly heated exchange. "But consider what we have gained in just a few weeks. Our Mars colony now has real-time communication with Earth. Ships traveling to the outer planets can coordinate better, reducing accidents. Families separated by space can stay connected. And this is just one application of the architect's knowledge. Imagine what we can accomplish if we embrace this opportunity instead of fearing it." The congressman was not satisfied. "But what about our enemies? What if hostile nations use this technology against us? Then we stay ahead by being smarter and more innovative," Margaret replied. The architects survived for millions of years not by building bigger weapons but by solving problems creatively. They understood that the greatest defense was not military might, but intellectual advancement. That is the lesson we should learn from them. The hearing lasted 3 days. Margaret was exhausted by the end, but felt vindicated when the committee voted to recommend full declassification of non-weapon-related architects' knowledge. It was not a complete victory, but it was progress. Daniel Cooper was also called to testify. He brought Lisa with him because she had insisted on coming. The sight of an 8-year-old girl sitting next to her father in the congressional chamber captured national attention. Photographers took hundreds of pictures. Lisa looked nervous but curious about all the important people in suits. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he kept his testimony brief. He described the architect's facility and what his crew had learned there. He explained why he had taught Lisa despite the security restrictions. He spoke passionately about the value of education and how humanity's future depended on nurturing young minds regardless of their background. The most memorable moment came when a skeptical senator asked Lisa directly, "Young lady, do you understand the implications of what your father taught you? Do you realize that some people think this knowledge is dangerous?" Lisa thought about the question seriously. Then she answered in her clear child's voice, "My daddy taught me that knowledge is not dangerous. It is what people do with knowledge that can be good or bad. The architects wanted to help people, so I want to help people too. That is not dangerous. That is just being nice." The chamber fell silent. Then someone in the gallery started clapping. Others joined in until the entire room was applauding. Even the skeptical senator smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. A child's simple wisdom had cut through all the political posturing and revealed the fundamental truth. The next evening, Margaret assembled her 5 most trusted scientists in the secure laboratory on the 44th floor. She had chosen people who had worked with her for years and who understood the importance of discretion. Kenneth was there along with Dr. Linda Martinez, a quantum physicist, Dr. Gregory Liu, a mathematician, Dr. Patricia Stone, a communications engineer, and Dr. Raymond White, a theoretical physicist who had published groundbreaking papers on space-time mechanics. Margaret had told them only that they would be meeting with a consultant who had insights into their communication problem. She had not mentioned that the consultant was an 8-year-old girl. That revelation would come soon enough, and Margaret wanted their unbiased reactions. At exactly 8 in the evening, Daniel arrived with Lisa. The little girl wore jeans and a t-shirt with cartoon stars on it. She carried a backpack decorated with more stars and planets. When she entered the laboratory and saw all the scientists standing there, she hid slightly behind her father, looking nervous. Margaret approached them with a warm smile. "You must be Lisa. Thank you for coming tonight. These are some of my colleagues who work on very difficult problems. Your father told me you like solving puzzles." Lisa nodded but did not speak. She was clearly uncomfortable with all the attention. Daniel put his hand on her shoulder reassuringly. "Why don't we show Lisa some of the displays?" Kenneth suggested. That might help her feel more comfortable. The laboratory was filled with holographic projections showing three-dimensional models of quantum particles and mathematical equations. Lisa's eyes widened when she saw them. She walked toward the nearest display, which showed a model of quantum entanglement between two particles separated by a large distance. "Oh, these are so pretty," Lisa said quietly. She reached out and touched the hologram, causing it to spin and change colors. "But this part is wrong." The scientists exchanged glances. Kenneth moved closer. "What do you mean this part is wrong?" Lisa pointed to a section of the code that represented how the particles maintained their connection across distance. "You are treating them like they are separate things, but they are not. They are both part of the same song." "That is what my daddy taught me. The same song Dr. Martinez repeated." "Can you explain what you mean by that?" Lisa looked at her father for permission. Daniel nodded encouragingly. Lisa took a deep breath and began explaining in the simple language of a child, but with concepts that made the scientists lean forward in fascination. "Everything in the universe is vibrating," Lisa said. "Even things that look still are actually moving very fast at a tiny level. My daddy says it is like music where every instrument plays a different note, but they are all part of the same song. When two particles are entangled, they are playing the same note even if they are far apart. But you are trying to send messages like you are shouting across an empty room. That does not work because space is not empty. It is full of other vibrations." Dr. Liu pulled out his tablet and started taking notes. "So you are suggesting that we should use the quantum foam of space itself as a transmission medium?" Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, exactly. If you match the frequency of your signal to the natural vibration of space, then the message does not get weaker over distance. It just rides along with the universe like surfing on a wave." For the next 2 hours, the scientists watched in amazement as Lisa walked them through concepts that challenged their fundamental understanding of physics. She used simple metaphors about music and waves and surfing, but the underlying mathematics was undeniable. Daniel stood nearby providing gentle guidance when Lisa struggled to find the right words, but mostly he just watched his daughter shine. Dr. Stone asked Lisa to write out some of the formulas on the whiteboard. Lisa hopped up and grabbed a pink marker. She stood on her tiptoes and began writing. Her handwriting was childish, but the equations were elegant. She filled 3 boards with mathematical notations while explaining each step in her simple way. "The architects taught that everything is connected," Lisa said as she wrote. "They said the biggest mistake young species make is thinking they are separate from the universe. But we are not separate. We are part of it. So when we want to send messages across space, we should not fight against the universe. We should work with it." Kenneth ran Lisa's formulas through his simulation software. The tablet screen showed results that made him gasp. "This is incredible. Lisa, your approach reduces signal degradation to almost zero. We could communicate with colonies at the edge of the solar system with perfect clarity." "Can we go further?" Lisa asked. "Can we talk to people around other stars?" Kenneth looked at Daniel, who nodded slightly. "Theoretically, yes. If we scale up the power and use a large enough array, we could communicate across light years." Lisa clapped her hands together. "That is so cool. Then people would not be lonely in space anymore." The innocence of her statement hit everyone in the room. This child was not thinking about corporate profits or military applications. She was thinking about lonely people in space colonies who wanted to talk to their families. The scientists had been so focused on solving technical problems, they had forgotten the human element. Dr. White had been quiet during most of the demonstration. He was the oldest scientist in the room and the most skeptical of new theories, but now he spoke up and his voice was shaking slightly. "Lisa, where did you learn to think about physics this way? This is not how we teach science in schools. My daddy teaches me," Lisa said simply. "Every night after I do my school homework, he teaches me about how the universe really works. He says the architects knew things that humans are still learning." The scientists all looked at Daniel. Margaret had briefed them about his background, but hearing it confirmed by Lisa made it real. There was a long silence in the laboratory. Finally, Dr. Martinez spoke. Mr. Cooper, I have been working in quantum physics for 20 years. What your daughter just explained in simple terms would take me months to teach to graduate students. If what you say about the architects is true, then humanity has been deprived of knowledge that could have advanced us by decades. That was the government's decision, not mine, Daniel said quietly. I was just following orders, but I could not let that knowledge die with me. So I taught Lisa. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I broke laws and put my family at risk. But I believe the architects were right. Knowledge should be shared. Margaret stepped forward. Tomorrow I'm going to contact several trusted colleagues at other research institutions. I want them to see what Lisa can do. I want independent verification of these formulas. And then I am going to release this information to the scientific community, regardless of what the government says. Daniel looked alarmed. Mrs. Hayes, you do not understand what you are up against. The people who classified the architect's discovery have unlimited resources and no accountability. They will shut you down. Let them try, Margaret said firmly. I am tired of secrets. I am tired of humanity being held back by fear and bureaucracy. Your daughter just gave us the key to connecting our species across the solar system and beyond. That is not something I can hide even if I wanted to. Lisa had been listening to the adults talk, and now she tugged on her father's sleeve. Daddy, are we in trouble? Daniel knelt down to her level and hugged her. No, sweetheart. You did something wonderful tonight. You helped people understand things that will make life better for everyone. I am very proud of you. Lisa smiled and hugged him back. Then she yawned. It was past her bedtime, and the excitement of the evening had tired her out. Daniel picked her up and she rested her head on his shoulder, already half asleep. The scientist stood in respectful silence as Daniel carried his daughter toward the exit. Margaret walked with them to the elevator. Before the doors closed, Daniel looked back at her. There is no going back from this, Daniel said. Once you start sharing this knowledge, everything will change. Margaret met his gaze steadily. Good. It is time for things to change. Daniel Cooper had been cleaning office buildings for most of his adult life. He preferred the night shift because it meant fewer people and fewer questions. At Quantum Dynamics, he started work at 10 in the evening and finished at 6 in the morning. The pay was decent and the health insurance covered his family. That was all that mattered. Tonight, Daniel arrived at work with his daughter Lisa like he did twice a week when his wife Susan worked double shifts at the hospital. Susan was a nurse, and sometimes the hospital needed her to cover for other staff. Daniel could not afford a babysitter on his salary, so he brought Lisa with him. She was a good kid who never complained. She brought her homework and books and kept herself entertained while he cleaned. Daniel pushed his cart through the empty hallways of the 42nd floor. Lisa walked beside him, humming a song she had learned at school. They reached the executive conference room and Daniel unlocked the door. The room still smelled like coffee and dry erase markers from the meetings earlier that day. Lisa immediately went to the big table and spread out her homework. She had math problems from school and a book report due next week. Daniel started his cleaning routine, emptying the trash cans under the table and wiping down the chairs. He had done this same routine thousands of times, and his mind wandered while his hands worked automatically. After 20 minutes, Lisa stood up and walked to the whiteboard. Daniel glanced at her but was not worried. She liked to look at the equations that scientists left on the boards. To her, they were like puzzles or art. Daniel had been teaching her mathematics since she was 4 years old. Not the simple stuff they taught in school, but real mathematics that explained how the universe worked. Lisa picked up a pink marker and studied the equations on the board. Daniel watched her from across the room. He saw her tilt her head the way she always did when she was thinking hard about something. Then she started writing. Her small hand moved across the board, adding numbers and symbols in the corner where there was empty space. Daniel finished wiping the last table and walked over to see what she had written. He recognized immediately that she was working with quantum harmonic functions. They had talked about this concept 2 weeks ago during one of their late-night lessons. Lisa had asked him why space signals got weaker over distance, and he had explained about quantum entanglement and particle decay. That looks good, sweetheart, Daniel said quietly. Did you figure out the recursion problem? Lisa nodded and pointed at her equations. I remembered what you said about everything vibrating at different frequencies. If you match the frequency to the quantum foam, then the signal does not degrade, because it is using the universe itself to travel. Daniel felt a familiar mix of pride and sadness. His daughter was brilliant in ways that most people would never understand. She could grasp concepts that took professional scientists years to learn. But he also knew this gift came with dangers. The world was not ready for what she could do. More importantly, the government would never allow her to share what she knew. "We should go," Daniel said gently. "Pack up your homework." Lisa put the marker back and ran to collect her papers and books. Daniel took one last look at the equations she had written. They were correct and elegant. Any physicist who saw them would realize their importance. He should erase them, but something stopped him. Maybe it was time for the truth to come out. Maybe humanity deserved to know what he had been hiding for 15 years. They left the conference room at 11:55 and continued cleaning other offices on the floor. Lisa yawned as they worked through the next 2 hours. By 2 in the morning, she was asleep on his cleaning cart, covered with his jacket. Daniel finished his shift and carried her to his old truck in the parking garage. The drive home took 30 minutes through empty streets. Daniel lived in a small house in the suburbs where the rent was affordable. Susan would be home soon from her shift. Daniel carried Lisa inside and put her in bed, still wearing her clothes. He kissed her forehead and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Daniel sat at the kitchen table thinking about the equations Lisa had written. He wondered if anyone would notice them or if they would just get erased with everything else. Part of him hoped they would be erased. Life was simpler when nobody asked questions. But another part of him was tired of hiding. Susan came home at 3:30 looking exhausted. She was a short woman with kind eyes and graying hair. She had been a nurse for 20 years and the work was taking its toll on her body. She smiled when she saw Daniel at the kitchen table. "How was your night?" Susan asked. "Quiet," Daniel lied. Lisa did her homework and fell asleep around 2. Susan poured herself coffee and sat across from him. She knew Daniel was hiding something. After 18 years of marriage, she could read his moods. But she also knew not to push him. Daniel had secrets from his past that he could not share even with her. The government had made sure of that when they gave him his new identity. "Is everything okay?" Susan asked gently. Daniel wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to explain about the architects and the knowledge he carried. He wanted to tell her that their daughter was learning things that could change humanity forever. But the words stuck in his throat. The secrecy agreement he signed 15 years ago had threatened prison time for him and anyone he told. "Everything is fine," Daniel said. "Just tired." Susan reached across the table and squeezed his hand. They sat together in silence, drinking coffee and listening to the house settle around them. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten with the approach of dawn. Daniel would sleep for a few hours, then wake up to make breakfast for Lisa before she went to school. At 7 in the morning, Daniel was awakened by his phone ringing. He fumbled for it on the nightstand next to the bed. The caller ID showed a number he did not recognize. Daniel almost declined the call, but something made him answer. "Is this Daniel Cooper?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes," Daniel replied cautiously. "This is Helen from Quantum Dynamics Human Resources. I am calling to inform you that Margaret Hayes, the CEO, would like to meet with you today at 2 in the afternoon. This is regarding an urgent company matter." Daniel felt his stomach drop. They had found the equations. They knew about Lisa. 15 years of hiding was about to end. "Is this about my daughter?" Daniel asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Hayes did not provide details, but she emphasized that this meeting is very important. "Please come to the executive offices on the 42nd floor. You are not in trouble, Mr. Cooper." But Daniel knew that was not true. He was in more trouble than this human resources person could possibly understand. The government would be called. His family would be investigated. Everything he had built would come crashing down. But he also felt a strange sense of relief. The burden of secrecy had been crushing him for years. Maybe it was time to finally tell the truth. "I will be there," Daniel said and ended the call. Susan was awake now, looking at him with concern. "What is going on, Daniel?" Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. He took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. "I need to tell you something, Susan. Something I should have told you years ago. 15 years ago, I was not a janitor. I was a lieutenant in the Space Exploration Service. My ship found something that the government did not want anyone to know about. They gave me a choice between prison and silence. I chose silence so I could have a life with you and Lisa." Susan stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. What did you find, Daniel? Knowledge, Susan. Knowledge about how the universe really works. And I have been teaching it to our daughter. 1 year after Lisa Cooper wrote her equations on a corporate whiteboard, humanity stood at a crossroads. The old world of secrets and isolated knowledge was dying. A new world of cooperation and shared understanding was being born. The transition was not smooth. There were setbacks and conflicts, but the direction was clear. Humanity was finally growing up. The most visible symbol of this change was the new communication network that spanned the solar system. Using Lisa's quantum harmonic approach, every colony from Mercury to the outer Kuiper belt could communicate instantly with Earth. Ships traveling between planets coordinated, their routes reducing accidents and improving efficiency. Families separated by millions of miles could see each other's faces in real time. The psychological impact was profound. Space no longer felt like an isolating void, but like an extension of home. The Europa colony provided the most dramatic example. The moon of Jupiter had a small research station with 30 scientists studying the ocean beneath the ice. For years, these researchers had felt cut off from Earth. Messages took hours to arrive and video calls were impossible. Many suffered from depression and loneliness. But with the new communication system, they could talk to their families daily. They could collaborate with colleagues on Earth as if they were in the same room. Morale improved dramatically and the quality of research increased. Similar transformations happened on Mars and the asteroid mining stations, and the new settlements being built on the moons of Saturn. Humanity was spreading through the solar system with confidence because people knew they could stay connected to their loved ones. The psychological barrier of space travel was crumbling. On Earth, the Cooper Education Initiative expanded rapidly. 2 years after the pilot program began, over 10,000 schools in 60 countries had adopted the new curriculum. The results were remarkable. Students showed measurably better problem-solving skills and creative thinking. But more importantly, they showed joy in learning. Education was becoming less about grinding through boring requirements and more about exploring fascinating questions. Lisa Cooper turned 10 years old, and her life had found a new balance. She still received media attention occasionally, but Margaret and Susan had successfully protected her from becoming a full-time celebrity. Lisa attended her small private school where she could learn at her own pace. She had friends who understood her and teachers who challenged her. She played soccer on weekends and collected rocks from different planets that mining companies sent her as gifts. But Lisa also continued her unique role as a bridge between the architect's knowledge and human understanding. Once a month, she gave presentations to groups of scientists and educators. These sessions were always enlightening because Lisa had a gift for explaining complex concepts in simple terms. She did not talk down to her audience, but she also did not get lost in technical jargon. She helped brilliant adults see things from fresh perspectives. Daniel Cooper became one of the most respected educators in the world. Universities offered him honorary degrees. He was invited to advise governments on science policy. But his greatest satisfaction came from working directly with students. He taught classes at the Cooper Initiative Model School where Lisa attended. He loved seeing children have moments of understanding when difficult concepts suddenly clicked. He remembered his own journey from military officer to janitor, to unlikely revolutionary. Life had a way of surprising you if you stayed open to possibilities. Susan Cooper wrote a book about raising a gifted child in extraordinary circumstances. The book became a bestseller and helped thousands of parents navigating similar challenges. Susan was honest about the difficulties and the fears. She wrote about the times she wanted to hide Lisa away from the world. She wrote about her anger at the government for forcing her husband to live a lie for 15 years. But she also wrote about the joys of watching her daughter flourish and the pride of seeing their family's story inspire others. Margaret Hayes never returned to corporate leadership. She found her true calling in education and advocacy. The Cooper Education Initiative became her life's work. She traveled constantly, meeting with teachers and policymakers and researchers. She raised funds to bring the program to underserved communities. She fought against attempts to commercialize or politicize the architect's knowledge. She became a fierce guardian of the principle that knowledge should benefit everyone, not just the wealthy or powerful. The government's relationship with architects' knowledge evolved slowly. The initial resistance gave way to grudging acceptance and eventually to genuine cooperation. A new framework was established for evaluating which discoveries should be shared immediately and which required more careful study. Weapon applications remained classified, but everything else was released through the Global Knowledge Initiative. The process was not perfect, but it was better than the old system of blanket secrecy. Agent William Clark retired from government service. In a surprising move, he wrote an editorial for a major newspaper, admitting that his attempts to suppress Lisa's discovery had been wrong. He argued that government secrecy had become reflexive rather than thoughtful. He called for reform and transparency. The editorial was controversial within intelligence circles, but it represented a shift in thinking among some officials. The other crew members from the Horizon's Edge slowly emerged from hiding. Each one had their own story of what they had done with the architect's knowledge over the years. Some had taught in quiet ways like Daniel. Others had tried to forget what they learned and live normal lives. A few had continued working in classified programs, feeling trapped by their security oaths. When they finally met again after 15 years of separation, there were tears and laughter and long conversations about what could have been. The reunion was held at the Quantum Dynamics headquarters, in the same conference room where Lisa had written her famous equations. Margaret hosted the event and made sure it was private without media intrusion. The 12 former crew members sat around the table sharing memories of their time at the architect's facility. They talked about the wonder they felt discovering an alien civilization. They talked about the frustration of being silenced. They talked about the hope they now felt seeing humanity finally embrace that knowledge. One of the crew members, a woman named Claire Yang, had become a community college teacher. She stood up during the reunion and said something that resonated with everyone. For 15 years, I taught basic physics to students who were just trying to get a degree. I followed the textbook. I gave the same lectures year after year, but inside I was screaming because I knew there was so much more I could teach them. Now finally I can share what I really know. My students are learning concepts I never thought I would be allowed to teach. Some of them will go on to do things I can only imagine. That is what Daniel and Lisa gave us, the freedom to teach truth. The group decided to write a book together documenting everything they remembered from the architect's facility. It would be a comprehensive record for future generations. The project would take years, but they had time now. They were no longer hiding. Lisa's 10th birthday party was a small affair with just family and close friends. Margaret brought a cake decorated with stars and planets. Some of Lisa's school friends came over for games and movies. For a few hours, Lisa was just a normal kid celebrating another year of life. But when the party ended and the guests went home, Lisa sat, with her father on the back porch looking up at the night sky. "Daddy, do you think the architects are still out there somewhere, Lisa?" asked. Daniel looked up at the stars. "I do not know, sweetheart. They disappeared millions of years ago, but in a way they are still here. Every time you solve a problem using what they taught, every time a student has a moment of understanding, every time humanity chooses cooperation over conflict, that is the architects living on through us." Lisa thought about that. "I hope they would be proud of us." Daniel hugged his daughter close. "I think they would be very proud, especially of you." The moon rose over the horizon bright and clear. Somewhere up there on that moon were human colonies communicating with Earth, using technology that Lisa had helped perfect. Somewhere beyond were other colonies spreading through the solar system. And somewhere even further were the stars where humanity would eventually travel. The future was vast and full of possibilities. In the house, Margaret and Susan were cleaning up after the party, talking and laughing. Outside, Daniel and Lisa sat together in comfortable silence. A father and daughter who had accidentally changed the world, a janitor who refused to let knowledge die, and a little girl who just wanted to help solve puzzles. They did not set out to be heroes. They just believed that understanding should be shared, and that every person, regardless of their job title or age, had something valuable to contribute. The architects had left their knowledge hoping that younger species would find it and grow. They had faith that intelligence would eventually triumph over fear. They believed that connection was stronger than isolation. Looking at the peaceful scene of the Cooper family gathered together on this ordinary evening, it seemed the architect's faith had been justified. Humanity still had far to go. There would be setbacks and struggles ahead, but the direction was set. 3 months after Lisa's revelation, the world had settled into a new normal. The initial chaos of conspiracy theories and political fighting had given way to focused action. International cooperation on architects' knowledge was formalized through the United Nations. A new agency called the Global Knowledge Initiative was established to coordinate research and ensure that discoveries benefited all of humanity. not just wealthy, nations. Margaret Hayes stepped down as CEO of Quantum Dynamics to lead a different kind of project. She had been approached by educators and scientists from around the world with an idea that excited her more than any business venture. They wanted to create a new educational system based on how the architects taught. They wanted to revolutionize how children learned, not just what they learned. The project was called the Cooper Education Initiative in honor of Daniel and Lisa. The goal was ambitious. Traditional education taught children to memorize facts and follow procedures. The architect's approach taught children to see patterns and understand connections. Traditional education separated subjects into isolated categories. The architects showed how mathematics and physics and biology were all describing the same underlying reality from different perspectives. Daniel Cooper became the lead curriculum consultant. He worked with teams of teachers and educational psychologists to translate architects' concepts into lesson plans, appropriate for different age groups. It was challenging work because the architects had not designed their teachings for children. But Daniel had already done this translation for Lisa. He knew how to make complex ideas accessible through metaphors and hands-on activities. Lisa herself became an unexpected advocate for educational reform. She spoke at conferences in schools describing how her father's teaching methods made learning fun. She demonstrated problem-solving techniques that amazed educators, but she also remained a normal 8-year-old who liked playing soccer and watching cartoons. Margaret was careful to protect Lisa from being exploited or burned out by too much attention. The first pilot schools opened 6 months after the revelation. 500 students in 10 countries participated in the experimental curriculum. The results were monitored carefully by researchers who wanted to know if the architect's approach actually worked better than traditional methods. The early signs were promising. Students in the Cooper Initiative schools showed higher engagement and better retention of material. More importantly, they showed increased creativity and problem-solving ability. When given novel challenges, these students approached them with confidence rather than anxiety. They had learned to see problems as puzzles to solve rather than obstacles to fear. One particularly striking example came from a school in rural Kenya. A class of 12-year-olds had been learning about water purification using principles Lisa's father taught. The students realized their village had contaminated water that was making people sick. Using what they learned, they designed a simple filtration system using locally available materials. The system worked. The village now had clean drinking water, and the students had learned that education could directly improve their lives. Stories like this multiplied. Students in Brazil developed better crop rotation strategies using ecological principles from the architects. A group of teenagers in Japan built a small fusion reactor as a science fair project, applying what they learned about harmonic energy. The reactor did not produce much power, but it proved the concept worked. Most impressively, it was built by ordinary students, not trained physicists. Critics of the initiative argued that pushing advanced concepts onto young children was inappropriate. Some parents complained that their children were being used as experimental subjects. A few educators worried that traditional skills like reading and arithmetic were being neglected in favor of flashy new theories. Margaret addressed these concerns directly in public forums. The Cooper Initiative is not replacing traditional education. It is enhancing it. Students still learn reading and math and history, but they also learn to see how these subjects connect. They learn that mathematics is not just abstract symbols, but a language for describing reality. They learn that history is not just memorizing dates, but understanding how societies evolve. This is not radical experimentation. This is giving children the tools they need to thrive in a complex world. Daniel often accompanied Margaret to these public discussions. He spoke from his experience as both a teacher and a father. I do not want Lisa or any other child to just memorize formulas. I want them to understand why those formulas work. I want them to be curious about the world and confident in their ability to figure things out. The architects knew that true intelligence is not about knowing facts. It is about being able to learn and adapt. The scientific community embraced the educational reforms enthusiastically. Universities began modifying their programs to align with Cooper Initiative principles. Graduate schools reported that students coming from pilot schools showed exceptional ability to grasp complex concepts quickly. These students had been trained to look for patterns and connections rather than just memorize information. Lisa continued her own education in a unique environment. She attended a small private school that Margaret had established specifically for children of exceptional ability. The school had only 20 students ranging from ages 6 to 14. But these were not typical children. Some had been identified as prodigies in mathematics or music or languages. Others simply learned differently than their peers and had struggled in traditional schools. The school's philosophy was simple. Every child learned at their own pace with curriculum, tailored to their interests and abilities. Lisa studied advanced physics in the morning, then played soccer with younger students at lunch, then took art classes in the afternoon. Her best friend was a 10-year-old boy named Carlos who was a musical genius but struggled with reading. They helped each other and learned that intelligence came in many forms. Susan Cooper had adjusted to the new reality of her family's fame. She left her nursing job to become the family manager, handling media requests and public appearances. But she was fiercely protective of Lisa's childhood. She turned down most interview requests and made sure Lisa had time for normal activities. She also became an advocate for other families dealing with gifted children, helping them navigate the challenges of raising kids who learned differently. The Cooper family moved from their small house to a larger home that Margaret helped them purchase. It had a library where Daniel could continue teaching, and a laboratory where Lisa could experiment safely. But Susan insisted it also have a big backyard where Lisa could play and just be a kid. Balance was important. Lisa might understand quantum mechanics, but she was still 8 years old. One evening, Margaret visited the Cooper home for dinner. It was a casual meal with Susan's homemade lasagna and Lisa's enthusiastic description of a science project she was working on. After dinner, Daniel and Margaret sat on the back porch while Lisa played with their dog in the yard. "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked. "Going public with all of this. Your life would have been simpler if you had stayed hidden." Daniel watched his daughter throw a tennis ball for the dog. "Every day I thank whatever forces in the universe put us on that path to find the architects. Yes, our life is more complicated now, but it is also more honest. Lisa does not have to hide who she is. I do not have to lie about my past. And maybe, just maybe, we helped humanity take a step forward." Margaret smiled. "More than a step, Daniel. You started a revolution. Education will never be the same. Our understanding of the universe has expanded exponentially, and it all started because a little girl wanted to help solve a puzzle on a whiteboard." Daniel laughed. She did not know she was changing the world. She just saw a problem and knew the answer. That is the beautiful thing about children. They do not overthink things. They just try to help. They sat in comfortable silence watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. In the distance, they could hear Lisa laughing as she played. It was a peaceful moment in the middle of a transformed world. The future was uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead. But for now, a father had given his daughter the greatest gift possible: the freedom to learn and grow and share her gifts with the world. And a CEO had learned that sometimes the most important innovations came not from boardrooms and laboratories, but from simple acts of teaching and sharing knowledge with an open heart. Margaret moved quickly and carefully over the next 2 weeks. She contacted 12 trusted colleagues at major research institutions around the world. Each one received an encrypted message inviting them to a private demonstration. She did not explain what they would see, only that it could revolutionize space communication technology. The first group arrived from Stanford University. 3 physicists flew in expecting to see some new equipment or novel theoretical approach. Instead, they met Lisa Cooper and watched an 8-year-old girl explain quantum harmonic functions while drawing pictures of waves and musical notes. The lead physicist sat down heavily in a chair afterwards and stared at nothing for 10 minutes. "This is not possible," one of the Stanford scientists kept repeating. "Children do not understand quantum mechanics at this level. This must be some kind of trick." But Kenneth showed them the simulation results. He showed them how Lisa's formulas reduced signal degradation to nearly zero. He showed them the test communications they had successfully sent to Europa Station using Lisa's approach. The data did not lie. Whether they could accept it or not, this child had solved a problem that had stumped the scientific community for years. Word spread quickly through unofficial channels. Scientists talked to other scientists. Research assistants gossiped with colleagues at conferences. Within a week, whispers were circulating about a breakthrough at quantum dynamics that involved a child prodigy. Margaret had anticipated this and prepared accordingly. She recorded video of Lisa explaining her formulas. She documented everything with timestamps and multiple witnesses. She made copies and distributed them to her trusted contacts with instructions to release them if anything happened to her or, Daniel's family. On day 16, Agent William Clark arrived at Quantum Dynamics with a team of government officials. Margaret's assistant called to warn her that men in dark suits were demanding to see her. Margaret took a deep breath and prepared herself for the confrontation she had known was coming. Agent Clark entered her office without knocking. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and cold eyes. Behind him came 3 other agents and a woman in a military uniform with colonel insignia. Ms. Hayes, I am Agent William Clark from the Department of Defense Special Projects Division. You are harboring classified information and personnel. Daniel Cooper is in violation of his security oath. You are now an accomplice to treason. Margaret stood behind her desk and met his gaze calmly. Agent Clark, with respect, the only treason here is keeping knowledge from humanity that could save lives. We have colonies on the outer rim dying because our communication systems are inadequate. Daniel Cooper and his daughter have given us the solution. A solution derived from classified alien technology, Clark said sharply. There are protocols for handling such information. You had no authority to share it with civilian researchers. The protocols you are referring to were written by people who wanted to weaponize everything instead of helping humanity advance, Margaret replied. I have made copies of Lisa's work. 27 research institutions across 12 countries now have the fundamental principles. You cannot put this back in the box. Clark's expression hardened. Ms. Hayes, you have committed violations of national security law. Do you understand the consequences? Your company can be seized. You can be arrested. Everyone you have shared this information with can be prosecuted. Margaret had expected threats. She had prepared for this moment by consulting with lawyers who specialized in whistleblower protections. More importantly, she had prepared public opinion. Agent Clark, 12 hours ago, I sent copies of Lisa's demonstration videos to 3 major news networks and 5 science journalists. Those videos are scheduled to release tomorrow morning unless I personally cancel them. If you arrest me or threaten my employees, those videos will go public immediately. The whole world will learn about the architects and how the government has been suppressing knowledge that could benefit all humanity. Clark's jaw tightened. You are playing a dangerous game, Ms. Hayes. This is not a game, Margaret said firmly. This is about the future of our species. A little girl taught me something your decades of secrecy could not. Humanity deserves the truth. The colonel, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Mrs. Hayes, I am Colonel Patricia Manning. I work in the Aerospace Defense Command. You need to understand that the architects' knowledge was classified for legitimate reasons. Some of their technology could be weaponized in ways that would destabilize global security. Then declassify the peaceful applications and keep the weapons classified, Margaret suggested. Lisa's communication breakthrough has no military value, except making it easier for our colonies to call for help. Why would you suppress that? Colonel Manning looked uncomfortable. It is not that simple. Once you release any of the architect's knowledge, people will start asking questions. They will want to know what else we found. They will demand access to everything. Maybe they should, Margaret said. Maybe people have a right to know that we found evidence of advanced alien civilization. Maybe they have a right to benefit from knowledge that could improve their lives. Agent Clark made a decision. He pulled out his phone and made a call. After a brief conversation, he hung up and looked at Margaret with an expression somewhere between anger and resignation. My superiors have authorized me to offer you a deal, Ms. Hayes. You will turn over all copies of the architect's information to us. Daniel Cooper and his family will be taken into protective custody for their own safety. In exchange, we will not prosecute you or your employees. We will even allow you to continue your research under government oversight. Margaret shook her head. No deal. Daniel and his family stay free. The information stays public, and there will be no government oversight of civilian research. Then you are under arrest, Clark said and gestured to his agents. Before the agents could move, Margaret pressed a button on her desk phone. Her assistant's voice came through the speaker. Helen, please execute Plan Omega. What is Plan Omega? Clark demanded. Margaret smiled. Plan Omega means that my assistant just sent the release codes to all 27 research institutions. In approximately 5 minutes, Lisa's videos and Daniel's background information will be uploaded to every major scientific database and social media platform in the world. You can arrest me, Agent Clark, but you cannot stop the information from spreading. Clark stared at her in disbelief. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, no? Margaret replied calmly. I just gave humanity its best chance at a real future." Agent Clark and his team left the office in a fury. Colonel Manning lingered for a moment. She looked at Margaret with something that might have been respect. "You do realize that this will change everything," Colonel Manning said quietly. "Society is not prepared for the truth about the architects. Then it is time for society to grow up," Margaret replied. Within minutes, the videos started appearing online. The image of little Lisa Cooper standing on her tiptoes writing equations on a whiteboard captured the world's imagination. The footage of her explaining quantum physics using metaphors about music and surfing went viral. Scientists around the globe started analyzing her formulas and confirming their validity. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with discussions about the child prodigy and her janitor father. News networks ran stories about government cover-ups and suppressed alien technology. Politicians faced angry constituents demanding answers. Why had this knowledge been hidden? What else was being kept secret? Daniel Cooper's phone rang constantly. Reporters camped outside his small house. He had to take Lisa out of school because journalists were harassing her teachers and classmates. Margaret immediately hired private security for the Cooper family and offered them rooms at her estate where they could have privacy and protection. Susan Cooper was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. She had known her husband had secrets, but learning the full truth had been shocking. Now their quiet life was destroyed and her daughter was famous around the world. But Susan was also angry. Angry at the government for forcing Daniel to hide for 15 years. Angry at a system that would rather suppress knowledge than share it. Margaret's own life became chaotic. The board of directors demanded emergency meetings. Investors were uncertain whether this publicity was good or bad for the company. But customer orders started pouring in. Space colonies wanted the new communication technology immediately. Commercial shipping companies wanted better coordination systems. Even rival corporations reached out asking to license Lisa's approach. The government tried to contain the situation, but it was too late. The truth was out and people wanted answers. Congressional hearings were scheduled. International scientific councils formed to study the architect's knowledge. Protests erupted demanding full declassification of all information about the alien facility. Through it all, Lisa remained remarkably calm. She did not understand why adults were fighting about math problems. She just wanted to go back to school and play with her friends. But her father explained that sometimes doing the right thing made people uncomfortable, and that was okay.